Hello, I'm Chris Moon, a fellow artist manager, and I will be your guide through tough love, adventures, and artist management. Today, we're flipping the script as we wrap up this first season here at Tough Love, wherein the interviewer, myself, becomes the interviewee. As we wind down this chapter, focused on origin stories, it dawned on me that while I've shared bits and pieces of my own personal history in various episodes, I never really took the time to give a foundation of where I'm coming from in regards to my own vantage point around artist management. So, we thought it would be fun to take the time to do so here. To assist us with this, I've invited my friend Greg Dobiahl to sit in my usual seat and ask the questions. I hope you find this conversation informative and useful as we move into this next phase of tough love, coming soon. I'm Chris Moon. I have a company called Anadonia Management, and I currently manage an artist that goes by the name of Apex Manor. And in the past, I've worked with a variety of different artists, including Josh Rouse for 17 years, Rosie Thomas, a band called Venus Hum, and a singer-songwriter named Landon Pig, and just a whole variety of other artists that I've had the pleasure to work with. I founded this little artist manager focused podcast, Tough Love, Adventures in Artist Management, a little over a year ago.
Cool. Well, to get some insight on your experience in the music industry and the history you have with it, where did the journey for you start? Did it start at school? You went to Belmont for music business. Did your journey start there? Did it start before then? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was always a huge, passionate fan of music, and I became very much enthralled with the industry side of things when I started going to concerts, because then it became beyond just radio and your kind of standard, buying a record, or back in the day, a CD, or God forbid, a tape, actually, for a while. I've been through all the formats. Beyond that kind of casual fandom, just seeing the mechanism around live performance really kind of got me excited about the idea of the industry in and of itself. So, I went to Belmont University and actually got a degree in music business, learned a ton there, and interned a ton when I was in college, and was fortunate enough to get a job out of an internship at a small little independent label based just outside of Nashville in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Sponge Bath Records, playful name. They had a band called Self that had a couple of minor alternative rock hits in the mid to late 90s, and it was a fun taste of what could come out of that particular area in Nashville that wasn't country or Christian. So I felt really invigorated by being able to kind of do and work in the music side of the music industry I was really interested in at that time. So one of the other things I did while I was in college, my best friend, Jason Moon Wilkins, no relation, had this idea of doing a compilation record of Southeastern artists. And from that, I was able to get my foot in the door with a variety of different music industry folks that were very patient, very kind to us both. And also through that compilation, we bumped into the first artist I started managing that I mentioned earlier, Josh Rouse. Jason met him at a Grantley Buffalo show that there were maybe 25, 30 of us at the Exit Inn. Gosh, that probably would have been in 96. And Jason ended up playing bass with Josh for a while, and I ended up managing him. So it was kind of a stair step of, going to school, interning, getting some experience, doing our own thing by putting out this compilation CD, and that kind of led to the idea of an introduction to the idea of management.
Definitely. Do you feel that your education at Belmont really shaped your understanding of the music industry, and you think it really assisted you? I know I hear a lot of people in the music industry today say that you don't really need a degree as much as you need real life experience. And while that might be true, how do you feel that your education shaped your understanding of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shaped the understanding of it, but I kind of straddle the line on both of those. I definitely see the advantage of getting the basics and the bones of the industry through an education. But I could equally argue you could do that through experience too. But an education in and of itself is not enough. And that's something I fortunately honed in on pretty early on. I started interning as soon as I could. I logged more intern hours than anyone in my graduating class. And it led to jobs and connections for me. I always like to say, I guess the best example and benefit of school beyond, the obvious things is I always use it as an excuse. And I heard somebody say this again recently, actually, that when you're in school, you have the ability to, connect and work with people in a way that maybe you couldn't outside of that kind of environment. Most people are pretty approachable, when a student reaches out and wants to interview you or talk to you about something and learn. So I did quite a bit of that. I had a summer that I was in Nashville in between semesters, and I didn't take summer classes, but I was getting anxious and bored. So I just pulled out a phone book and picked out 4 or 5 people I thought would be really great to talk to, and totally lied and said I was doing a project and needed to interview somebody. And got an hour of, FaceTime with them. And a couple of those people were very helpful to me early on in my career. And I was taken back by how just open they were. In general, to not only meet, but also share experiences. So I don't know, I guess the combination of all that is almost like a mentorship situation where ideally, you're getting that basic education, but you're also creating relationships and getting more of an inside track and look at what actually happens in the industry. Because I don't think a class can really expose you to all of that in and of itself. I mean, I think you need to step out and just do your own thing and figure it out. And that's kind of what we did with that compilation that we put together. It was like, what's it like to talk to a band you don't know and say, hey, can you give us a free track? We're trying to help. We want to help promote you, but we're, trying to figure all this out on our own. And, so opportunities like that. I'm definitely a big fan of learning trial by fire, if you will, and just, taking a shot at it and figuring it out as you go. I mean, surround yourself with people that hopefully have insight and can assist you in certain ways. But, sometimes you just have to, just do it. I mean, I did that. I started promoting shows right out of college too, because there was artists I wanted to see perform that weren't coming to Nashville. So I saw an opportunity there and, selfishly just wanted to see some artists in particular. So I called up and made an offer and they said, yes, we'll come play. And, before I knew it, I was promoting shows, but I mean, I didn't do that. I couldn't have done that solely just from going to school.
When you were just starting out after college, how did you really get into the industry full time? Was that a transition that you needed to work multiple different gigs until you could really dedicate yourself full time to something in the music industry where you had the amount of finances that you needed, the proper resources, the capacity to do so? How did that work out?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly took, let me think for a moment. I think it took me about 8 years before I could wholeheartedly say I was making a living solely off of, the music industry. Funny enough, when I met Josh and we first started out, I left the little label I was working at, and I definitely was like, oh, I'll do okay here and I can just manage. And, about 2 months later I was broke and I was like, what do I do now? So Josh was actually working at a hotel in downtown Nashville as a valet. So I got a job there with him, and we both worked together. I think he worked for another 2 or 3 years. I think it was his 3rd record before he stopped working there. And then I still had another 3 or 4 years ahead of me before I made enough money to stop having that kind of full-time, part-time job, if you will, to kind of support me. But, I had a lot of liberation through that period because doing a job like that, as, frustrating as it can be, maybe because it takes you away from your passion, it also liberated me financially to be able to put everything else I had into my career. So I never had to kind of make decisions or be concerned about how I was going to take care of myself financially and pay the bills in any of the decisions that I made for my artists at that time. So yeah, it was tricky. And I definitely was, working 80, 90 hours a week. It felt like, I don't know if I ever stopped doing that too much. Because, when you become a parent, that's a full-time job too. So it all kind of adds up, but even nowadays. But, if you're doing something you love, then putting time into it is not that difficult. And I guess the way I always looked at it is if I can continue to do something that I really love and I'm passionate about, if that means I've got to, punch a clock for 30, 40 hours a week to kind of make ends meet, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So I did that for several years and, made the most of it. And thankfully I had really caring and patient employers that allowed me to take sabbaticals, if you will, at times where, I could go on tour, take a week off here, a few days off there to kind of make it work. But it's interesting. A lot of people I know now, even that, most people would look at as being relatively successful in their career. They have 2 or 3 hats they wear. It almost feels like whether it's out of interest or necessity that, people in this industry have a tendency to just bounce around a lot and switch things up. And also, again, just kind of wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of an understanding, which I also really appreciate. Not every career is like that, but
yeah, it seems that sort of flexibility and nimbleness to switch gears within the industry is almost, it almost seems like a necessity, to stay afloat, quite honestly. But
it is now. And I try to, I've been able to teach a little bit in my career too, which I really appreciate the opportunity to do. And I mentioned I interned a lot. As a student, I've had a lot of interns over the years in various capacities and whatnot within the industry.
Where'd you teach?
I taught at McNally Smith in St. Paul for a while once I moved to Minnesota. And then before that, I taught at Berkeley online.
Oh, cool.
For quite a while. So yeah, I've had both environments, online and in person, and they were both a lot of fun. But the kind of whole mentoring thing when it comes to like interns and working with folks, is just something I've always really enjoyed. And I think it's really crucial. I had a lot of really important mentors in the early stage of my career, and some of them I'm still in touch with. And I just felt really fortunate to have that guidance early on. Matter of fact, one of the guys I worked with at Sponge Bath Records, Andy McLennan, taught me a lesson that was just always stuck in my mind. I remember coming to him and saying, "Hey, I don't really understand how this works." And, he immediately looked at me and said, "I don't either, but I know somebody that does." And I'm like, "Oh, great. That'll be awesome. Then we can figure it out." And before I could even, complete that thought, he was on the phone and handed it over to me. And I was talking to somebody that was an expert in that particular area. And that just, showed me, and his history was in artist management too. So it just showed me and imprinted on me the fact that, it's okay to admit you don't know something. It's just better and best to know somebody that might know that answer and be humble enough to reach out. So that's a role I try to play as much as I can. A little later in my career now, not that I'm still picking up the phone and calling people, asking questions. So I don't know. I don't profess to be an expert by any means, but it's been really a good lesson to learn, and one I try to encourage people to think about, is that, this is a fast-paced, constantly evolving and changing industry that is multifaceted, both on the business level and then the kind of creative and personal, mental health. All of that is there's just a lot rolled into it. So nobody's perfect, and if you can surround yourself with colleagues and peers that can assist each other through those kind of moments as they pop up, and have that as a resource, that's certainly what really gives me comfort in the work that I do, versus trying to feel like there's certainly a style of management where it's like, I know everything and I can't show a weakness. And that works, I guess, for some people. But for me, I've always felt like I'm better off being a constant student, constantly learning, and, hopefully knowing that person to call at the time I need it, as opposed to, faking my way through it. I mean, there's always a little bit of that, but you don't want to that shouldn't be your MO. That shouldn't be your habit. Totally.
And you're never going to be able to know everything. There's always going to be something that you can learn and something that you can grow with. And finding those mentors are definitely super important. But when you first started managing Josh, did you find that management was something you kind of always had in mind, something on your radar that you wanted to sort of get to? Or did you more or less just kind of stumble upon it? Did you meet Josh and was like, oh, hey, I'm going to manage you now? Or how did that occur?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fascinating to me on how artists find managers and how managers find artists, or how people end up managing in general.
Right.
For me, it was total happenstance. And I'll give a lot of credit to Josh, because he identified what my role was before I realized it. When I graduated from Belmont and first started out in industry, it was at the height of the CD industry. And really, I think, who was I talking to recently? I think it was Mark Cunningham at Red Light mentioned this too, because we both started around the same time. It was really label driven, and managers were not really thought of much and didn't play a big role, to be honest. So management wasn't really something that I initially had a feeling on per se. I always thought, when I met Josh and wanted to support his career, I thought I would get a job at a label doing A&R and then sign him. But then something occurred to me as we were going through that process of just introducing him to various people in the industry. It's like, yeah, that could happen, but what if I got fired, or what if he got dropped? Then we wouldn't have that relationship anymore. So I think we were in New York doing a round of meetings with various labels. And at one point or another, he's like, well, why don't you just manage me? You're already doing it. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that as an option, but sure. And the thing I liked about that, and a kind of epiphany as to why I think it worked really well for me, and I could take to it pretty quickly, was I never wanted to get, and this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, I never wanted to be an expert on everything, or anything in particular necessarily. I mean, I tried my hand on various elements of the industry, and it was well-rounded and suited. I've worked a little bit, interned at radio and distribution, and knew a little bit about touring and a little bit about publishing, but I wasn't an expert in any of those, and I didn't feel an affinity for any of them in particular. So I kind of realized, wow, as a manager, I can have a good working knowledge of all of that, and that's kind of what I need to do. I already have that, and I want to know a little bit more, but I don't have to be an expert in anything. Except the artist, you're working for, essentially. So it kind of all clicked for me. I was like, oh, this is perfect. And I think I also felt really protective and empowered in that role, in a sense of, I always viewed myself as the biggest fan of the artist I'm working with. And almost every artist I've ever worked with, because it's part of the criteria for me, at least personally, as to why I want to bring something on, is I gotta feel passionate enough about it that I would share it with other people in general. Like anyone would that is passionate about, art in any way. So if that, when those things start to click, it just felt like, okay, being the the hub of that wheel works, for me. It kind of ticks all the boxes as far as what I like to do from a business perspective, but more importantly, it's also what kind of drives me and my passion for working with an artist in the first place.
When you mentioned that you want to be a fan of the music first and foremost, what goes into the relationship between a manager and an artist? Specifically for you, what's the balance between, business and friendship? Do you feel a certain responsibility for the overall well-being of your artist as a friend and as another human being? What's the balance between, business and friendship within management?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can break it down a couple of different ways. I mean, it's all intertwined, I don't think you can, I guess there's some people that can really compartmentalize it in a way. I was never all that great at it. The other point of criteria for me in working with an artist is, do I like this person? Like, do I want to see them win in some capacity? Or do I think they have the ability to do that and have the drive themselves? So that kind of speaks to the kind of personal component. I'm a little leery of calling it friendship per se, because you have to be willing to, speak some hard truths. And I guess friends kind of do that too, but not always, it's from a different place. You got to be able to carry bad news and not like sugarcoat it. And that's hard to do, I think, from a friendship perspective. But I do think it's possible to kind of straddle that line pretty well. The artists I work with now, Ross, I mean, I consider our relationship to be, based more on that, than anything else in a way. But we've also worked with a bunch of different people over the years, so we kind of know how to straddle that a little bit. I think I can honestly say I have a better relationship with a lot of the artists I don't work with now than I used to, because we were able to kind of, focus more on the friendship side of it when you take away all the business element of it, And I love the fact that I've been able to carry on relationships with pretty much everybody I've worked with, even when, for whatever reason, we decided to part ways on the professional level. So yeah, it's a hard thing to straddle, but I think it's important. I don't think you can completely, or at least I've never been able to completely, strip it all away. Yeah. But I've got to at least like the person I'm working on their behalf. And if I don't have that connection, it makes it really hard to be motivated to do it. I've definitely had an opportunity to work with other people that I haven't had a connection with, and it probably would have been good on the business side, but that's not really my speed. Yeah. So there's a famous, or a relatively famous, or certainly highly respected booking agent, Frank Riley. And I think he said this in interviews before, so I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but he famously passed on Dave Matthews Band because he just didn't get it. Musically, he wasn't passionate about it. Mm-hmm. And, it's, when you hear stories like that, it's, he owns that 100% as far as I know. And stands by, his choices based on his passion for a project. And I think that's a good North Star to have. You can't really regret missing an opportunity to work with something that you don't love, because that's going to be too much like work. And it's probably not going to be 100% successful, depending on how you define that to begin with. So I definitely try to keep that perspective in mind.
For sure. Well, how do you quantify success? Can you quantify success? I guess that's
it's different for everybody, I think. I do think it's important for you to kind of hone in on that and come to some sort of agreement or terms with the artist you work with. Some artists are never happy in a sense that they always want to progress and have a bigger audience and have more streams and sell more tickets or whatever. And I think everybody wants that, but at a certain point, you have to balance that against what you're doing creatively and how it's perceived, and what you're willing to do to promote it too, for that matter. So there's so many factors that go into that, but I think it's important to manage expectations and just hone in on, hey, where are we going in the short term? And, where do we want to be in the long term? And what are we willing to do to kind of achieve those goals that are reasonable? I've certainly had a lot of campaigns where I feel like everyone involved has done their best possible work, and maybe it didn't resonate in the way anybody wanted it to, or was hoping, but you can feel good about the work, and I also argue and say too, if you're doing really good work and feel really good about it, and you put your head down and you can be resourceful and patient and persistent in doing that work, eventually things come around. Eventually an opportunity presents itself, or people warm up to what you're doing finally, there's always a chance to do that. You don't want to chase what you think is successful in order to have success. I think you're much better off to be patient, persistent, and do the art you want to do and love. And as long as it's resonating, at least with a certain minimal viable audience, feel comfortable in your skin with that, and just try to grow it organically as much as you can.
Well, sort of looping back to your career story, your path in the industry, what did you do after managing Josh?
Yeah, so I had a stretch where I co-ran an office for network management in Nashville for a while. And we had a lot of artist imprints there. So we put out a lot of records. I learned a lot about the other side of that element of the industry as far as, marketing records and putting them out, it was a really fun time. And I learned a ton and felt really good about that. But coming out of that experience and still continuing to manage Josh, I had to kind of pivot a little bit. And again, I was kind of getting antsy, and I was looking around trying to figure out, like, at this point in my career, I had a family and 2 kids. So I was like, do I try to invest 3 to 5 years of my life in developing a new artist? Tried that with a handful of things, and it didn't quite work and gel after a year or two. So I was like looking around trying to figure out, like, how do I, and this has been a big part of the second kind of chapter, or so I guess you could say, of my career. One of the things that's really great about just putting hours in logging years in an industry is you get to know a lot of people and you create a lot of relationships. So I was coming out of that going, well, how do I leverage that in a good way? And a couple of times in my career, I've been able to kind of figure that out, even though it's a tall question and a hard thing to answer. So I was working with an artist, Matthew Perryman Jones, and I was getting to know his back catalog, and he told me the easiest way for me to access it was to go on a site called Noise Trade. And I'd heard of Noise Trade through a dear friend of mine, again, somebody else I consider a mentor on a personal level, even, who was one of the founders. And I danced around it a little bit when I was at Network, but never really totally took hold. And they iterated a little bit, but I was fascinated with not only the mechanism they developed into, but the response they were getting from it, because they backed accidentally into a really powerful component that I still think is very relevant today, which is building email lists and direct connections with artists. Through giving away music, you would gather an email address, and after they got about 250,000 people on their email list, and they began to trust in that community, began to trust in what Noise Trade was putting in front of them to discover new music, that was really powerful. So I think it was with Josh shortly thereafter, I was like, oh, we'll do a thing with Josh and push it out to that 250,000 people. And we did, and we gave away I think close to 20,000 downloads. So, and his email list was around, I guess, 7,000 or 8,000 people, which was really solid. I mean, this is 20 years ago, almost now, not quite 15 years ago. So to be able to triple that essentially, was really great. And the longevity and activity within that community that we saw continue for him was really powerful. So again, I just had a eureka moment where I was like, oh, I know a lot of people that would really love to do this. So, and they didn't really have a business model for how to, quote unquote, feature and present beyond editorially to that audience. So I looked at it as a marketing mechanism and as a potential revenue stream for the company. So Actually, I went to one of the founders and I was basically like, hey, I'm going to go to South by Southwest. If I just go and talk about Noise Trade while I'm down there, will you guys buy me a badge? And they're like, sure. So I did that and went down and drummed up some business and kind of laid out kind of a pricing structure and essentially pulled a bunch of people into the platform. And out of that, I was just taking a commission on what I was doing. And then eventually I was driving, a majority of their revenue. And I started kind of working there full time almost. Cool. In addition to working with Josh. So when my relationship with Josh kind of subsided, a few years back, I had that to kind of lean into. But it was one of those things where I was like, oh, now instead of just helping a handful of artists as a manager, I can sit on the other side of the fence and I can actually help, tons of artists each week get in front of new fans and find new fans. So it was a real personal and ultimately, financial career win for me to have that playground to kind of work in and really kind of build up. And I'll say the founders of that company were very open to the ideas I brought to the table and how we were able to develop it together. So in much of the same way that I kind of had carved out my industry and career identity around management, in particular working with Josh, because I worked with him for 17 years and he was my first artist. Kind of this second chapter of like the work I did at Noise Trade kind of opened up a similar kind of identity point for me for a while and expanded my network to a large degree, which was really great. And we got to champion a lot of amazing artists real early on, whether it was Lumineers before they put out a first record. Gosh, I remember Greg Nadell at Atlantic sending me Vance Joy when right before his record came out, and just like, kind of hearing where that could go and playing a role in that in a very small way early on, helping him develop a fan base before they took it to radio. Gosh, just so many artists that we had the pleasure of, working with early in their career, was a thrill and definitely something that I really cherish. So yeah, it's the other thing I kind of learned is it's really hard. And I definitely have had seasons of like, I don't know, choppy waters where it's like, I don't know, what am I doing? Where am I going? But I somehow managed to continue to find a path through that and fall into good opportunities with really good people. So as Noise Trade wrapped up, just going back to the first part of last year, I was like, now what's next? And spent a while trying to figure that out. Started a few different initiatives. One being this political initiative now called Pledge 46, which is a partisan PAC essentially focused on electing the Democratic ticket in November of 2020. We've had to reiterate around that a little bit due to the pandemic, but still feel like that's going to have hopefully the impact we intended, and definitely getting artists involved in that's been really great. And that came out of a conversation with a friend of mine, Kyle Fournette, who had run for Congress and really was super passionate about figuring out how to make the music industry work on the political scope in a partisan way, which really resonated with me. So honestly, all I've been able to do really in that capacity is fan the flames of, where he wanted to go with that. But it was another touch point where I was like, ooh, I know a lot of people this will resonate with. How can I help? So it kind of came out of that. And then, the other thing in starting this podcast is I've always been a big fan of podcasts. And but I never really created anything myself. And I tried a few different approaches with podcasting with a couple other friends of mine that I couldn't quite pull together, unfortunately. But, at least through that process, I understood, or at least I thought I understood what it would take to kind of launch it. So I did a deep dive into figuring that out last summer and launched, this podcast last September, I guess. So it's been almost a year. And it's one of those things where I realized too that I think I enjoy engaging with managers more than artists right now in my career.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm really fascinated and interested in what makes a manager tick. And everyone's so different that it's just been fun hearing their stories and getting to know them in a different way. And I think it's interesting for people that are interested in that career path or work in industry, but I think it's equally as interesting to artists. There's a certain amount of mystery around all of it that I think is fun to kind of unfold. And I wasn't really getting quite that point of focus in other, podcasts. So I was like, well, there seems to be a little bit of a lane here for this. But regardless of that, it's just been fun having conversations and learning from, my friends and peers, and one that I hope to continue to be able to do. So it's been, I try to get, as I go a little further in my career, I try to get a little bit wiser about, okay, how do I leverage my experiences in a positive way? And I think this is just one example of that, hopefully, but it's definitely been a fun one. I've been really humbled by the people that have been willing to have these conversations, and I hope that they're interesting enough and useful enough to continue to find an audience. The one point of that story I left out, so that kind of got me through the end of last year roughly, but I was also equally thankful that a friend of mine turned me on to a company called Ambient Inks, which is a print shop in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and they do merchandising for Bon Iver, Sullivan Esso, The Midnight, Iron and Wine, just a ton of different really fantastic artists. And they do it with a ton of intent and a whole lot of love. And I just, having run a company, because I ended up running Noise Trade in the end and hired a bunch of people, and going through that, having that responsibility, stepping away from that and kind of coming in as an employee has been a fun learning experience for me in a real positive way. But I also kind of sit there and go, oh man, I really love all the intent that goes into this. It's not just, tossed together to make a little bit of money. It's like, no, we really want to change the garment industry and want to be more sustainable with it. We really want to support artists in their endeavor. And it's become actually more important now during the pandemic, because that's one of the few direct ways artists can raise money and continue to engage with their fans in a meaningful way, in light of the fact that no one's touring right now. So it's been really great to have that as another kind of point of focus. And it's kind of full circle in a way too, because in high school and college, I didn't go to a show that I didn't buy a T-shirt, for, and was always really, and as a manager making merch and knowing the importance it plays to an artist and their bottom line and their connection to a fan, it feels like it's like, okay, I can be the fan here too, but I'm also serving a really important purpose and touch point for the artist, and so therefore it's kind of circular in a sense. So, and I get to work with managers again, and I get to work with artists, and I get to play a cool role and a big part of what should be their business. So really enjoying that season as well, and that opportunity.
Do you have any future fun projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I do love getting into different things for sure, but it's kind of I guess how to categorize it, because it wasn't by choice, but this season that I had last year to kind of reflect on my career and what I was going to do next really sparked a lot of elements of creativity. So I definitely want to see the Pledge 46 project through, continue to support Kyle on that, and thankfully working with you on the podcast, Greg, has been really great to interject a life into that and keep me focused in that regard. And all the work I'm doing at Ambient's been keeping me on my toes and filling that kind of full focus point for me to a large degree. And Management still in and of itself has been really great. I mean, I had a great year with Ross last year. He went out and ended up touring with Strand of Oaks, both as a guitarist and as a supported band. And then I was able to get him on a string of Not a Surf dates on the West Coast at the beginning of the year before everything shut down. And, felt like we had a couple of really, really nice wins there on his last album. So, it feels like a lot of these things that I have my hands in, thankfully, have continued to kind of fill that need to hopefully be both creative and also just kind of work within the means of the reach that I have and the history that I have. If I was to look ahead, I would say, honestly, right now, I think putting most of my time and attention towards those things, and then also just trying to be supportive of my family and their creative endeavors. My wife's an author and just got her MFA, so she's focusing on writing. And I want to be supportive in that capacity. And my daughter's learning guitar and bass this summer, which is fun, and really into music and soccer. So I want to be supportive and spend more time around that. And my son is way into comic books and drawing and being creative in that regard.
Yeah.
So, I feel like at this point I have a pretty good balance with it all. And I'm just hoping I can kind of continue to juggle all those things in a healthy way. And, but who knows, everything runs in cycles. So it'll be really interesting to see where my wife and the kids go with their creative endeavors and how that all plays into things. And, certainly anxious to see where the podcast goes as well. And the political things a little bit more of a timely manner, but I think if we do good work out of it, there'll be opportunity for that to continue. And the response we've had on the merch side at Ambient's been phenomenal during the pandemic. And I think that's only going to continue. To see fans support artists is really endearing. And as soon as we can all start touring again, that just means that's going to be that much more busy. So, very, very thankful and grateful that everything is going as well as it is right now in that sense.
That's awesome. That's really great. Well, should we do some fun little lightning round?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right. Number one, what's the first album you ever bought?
Technically, the first record I bought was the soundtrack to The Empire Strikes Back. I still have it. And my son's a big Star Wars fan, so it's fun to pull that out, and we still listen to records from time to time. I think the first real record I bought, which I also still have, and sadly was the last record I bought at the time, was Synchronicity by the Police.
Okay.
But that was right and probably realistic. I think it came out in 83. I probably bought it in 84, but by 84, 85, everything was tipping towards cassettes. So I immediately kind of switched to that format. But I kept the record, both those records. So, and I was lucky. I was lucky that in my college years, I spent a lot of time at Great Escape and Phonolux in Nashville, and there were old, used record stores. And when vinyl was not popular, I went and bought like a bunch of Stevie Wonder and Prince and Bruce Springsteen, which there's a lot of Springsteen records out there. But I mean, now you go into like a record store and like some of those records, I bought them for like $3 each, and some of them sell for like $30-$40 because they're kind of hard to find used at this point. I definitely have bought quite a few records over the years, but those were the first touch points.
That's awesome. That's really cool. What was the first concert you attended?
My sisters and I got my dad tickets to go see ZZ Top for Father's Day. And I got to go with him. So, and I was pretty much hooked after seeing that. And I recently watched their documentary, which is fascinating and really, really good. Like so much better than I anticipated. Not that I thought it would be bad, but I did not know the history of their early part of their career, and that's what it focuses on. And it's really a good watch if you're so inclined. But
cool.
From there on, I was hooked.
Sweet. What's the last concert you attended?
Yeah, unfortunately, I would like to. There's so many this summer that I wish I could say would be the case, but technically, the last concert I went to see was Nathaniel Rateliff at State Theater, and that was literally a day or two before everything kind of shut down. He played at a political rally before Super Tuesday here in St. Paul, and I got to go and see him and Bernie that Monday before, and then he did 2 nights at State Theater, and I think I went to second night on Wednesday, and then I think everything shut down on like that Friday or so. It's kind of crazy.
Definitely.
It was a great show. Yeah.
Sweet. Can you share a recent music discovery of yours? You found any new music?
Yeah, well, trying to think of something I really, really love that I just kind of discovered recently. Music's interesting to me because usually takes a moment to kind of seep in.
Yeah.
For me, I can hear something in passing, but usually it takes me a while to spend time with it. But I'll mention this only because I became a fan of hers over the last couple of years, and she just put out a new record. Courtney Marie Andrews, I think, is great. A friend of mine who I really value his music opinion has been a fan for a long, long time. So her name was on my radar, but I had never really spent a lot of time with her music. But she played at Americana Music Awards a few years ago when I was there. And outside of Brandi Carlile, I think she had the best performance of the night, certainly the most surprising performance. And I've just been kind of taken ever since. And oddly enough, I just realized this earlier today, she opened for Nathaniel Rateliff at the last show I saw, but last show I saw prior to that was Brandi Carlile opening up the Fillmore in Minneapolis, and Courtney opened up for that show too. Oh, cool. So I saw her twice in like a couple of weeks' time, roughly, 2 or 3 weeks' time, and so she was at she was opening for both of the last 2 shows I was at.
Cool, small world.
That's funny. It is, yeah.
And the last lightning round question is, what do you enjoy most outside of music?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Right now, I think what I'm enjoying the most is going for walks in the morning. I try to get up every morning and go for a walk. Being at home during the pandemic and being around the family all the time, why it's great in some ways. It's also isolating in others, which I think a lot of people could probably speak to. So just being able to get out and be active and, listen to some music or listen to some podcasts and just kind of get out of my own head for a bit has been really something I'm enjoying. Outside of that, the other practice I have that I think is really good, and my wife has brought to me, is reading every night before I go to bed. It's a good habit, good trigger. It means I can't read otherwise during the day. Like picking up a book and reading during the day, it's like after 20, 30 minutes, I just want to go to sleep. So it's a trigger point. True. So for better or for worse, but I'm reading so much more, than I used to. Awesome. And the one thing I'm missing during all of this is going to a movie, though. Definitely. I mean, I miss going to shows. That's a given. But I really miss going to see films in a theater. I look forward to that coming back. I guess that would pre-pandemic. I think that probably would have been my go-to answer of like what I enjoy the most outside of music would be going to see movies. I love that experience and really miss it. So, yeah.
Wow. Thanks for chatting today. I really enjoyed hearing your side of the story and everything and learning from your insights. That was really cool.
Let me extend an extra special thanks to Greg for taking the reins and asking such thoughtful questions today. And thank you for taking the time to listen. If you're so inclined, please rate us, follow us, or like us at Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Tough Love Pod. That's TOUGHLOVPOD. And above all, share this podcast with all your friends and fellow music industry and artist communities. It takes a village. You can reach us at chris@anhedoniamanagement.com. That's CHRIS at ANHEDONIANGMT.com. Be well, trip up, get back up, and let's learn as we go along. Until next time.